So I'm Kevin Kobelsky from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. It's great to be here in Toronto. This is home for me in a way. I lived here for 9 years, worked for Ernst & Young and for Canadian Tire. And so I greatly anticipated coming back to Toronto. It's been a while since I've been back, and you think of all the touchstones, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I had my first experience driving in. I sat in the Gardner for an hour yesterday, and it brought it all back to me. So I feel like I'm back. I'm back sitting on the highway. So I'm here to talk about the paper that Tony just presented. I got 4 things that I want to talk about. The first general thing is let's just talk about the contribution a bit. Some of the reviewers raised that issue, so I'll spend a couple slides on that. So in general, this is a paper about the impact of IT controls on a regulated financial reporting. And the question, is that important? Well, if it isn't, then what is? That sounds pretty important. And of course, it's interesting to an AIS audience. So the question then becomes, what's the contribution in relation to the previous research? So in terms of 8Ks, there's a paper done by one of the co-authors on this, who was a co-author on this earlier paper, that compared 8K timing pre-SOX, post-SOX, and they found that things were more timely post-SOX, but they didn't look within the SOX period. So, and the question that's raised in this paper says, well, okay, that says that there was an improvement, but it doesn't say why there was an improvement post-SOX. Although that, to me, doesn't sound like a big stretch, but okay, fine. Next, there's a lot of papers on the effects of material weaknesses in internal controls, on regulatory reporting in general. So the original paper, I think one of the most famous ones, is the effect of material weaknesses on delays in year-end reporting by Ettrich et al. In 2006, and that's not referenced in the paper, so I would recommend that you'd add that in. So that's on general year-end, that's on year-end reporting. And then Impink et al., which is referenced, looks at 10Ks, okay, but nobody's looked at 8Ks, and nobody's looked at IT material weaknesses. Now on IT material weaknesses, we got a paper that I did with, so that's Clam et al., 2012. So we looked at the persistence. F from G, hey, they've got some work in here as well. And there's a paper also referenced in 2012 that says IT weaknesses are associated with diminished forecast quality. That's an MISQ article. But the question, nobody's looked at IT material weaknesses and filings, so far as I know. So then the question back to contribution. So given these prior findings, which have overall been, okay, material weaknesses overall lead to less timely reporting, is this enough to go and say, well, now we're looking at IT material weaknesses with an 8K, incrementally? Because some people react and say, well, we already know the material weaknesses delay reporting, so how much more does this add? And I would say yes. I would say, first of all, confirmatory evidence is a good thing. In an 8K setting, especially in a post-Hunton era, right? It's good to see someone else. And for those of you non-academics, we've had our own little bit of scandal within the ranks in terms of one of our brethren has been caught falsifying data, ironically in audit-related research. And so a number of papers have been retracted, and so we're going through our own little Enron thing. So yes, confirmatory evidence done independently, I think, has value. But for me, the real sizzle in this paper is you're doing a deep dive on IT weaknesses effect on regulatory filings. And as an AIS, an AIS person, that's what I care about. So now I'm going to make 3 points, suggestions that I think would enhance the paper. The paper makes 2 arguments that are complementary. First, there's a governance-based argument that says, okay, if we have strong corporate governance, that enhances compliance. Okay, there's nothing surprising about that, right? And so the paper says, well, these material weaknesses are a proxy for strong corporate governance. And so we're just redoing that same argument. Well, an argumentation problem here is that material weaknesses are an outcome of governance. They're not a measure of governance. And that's the way they've been treated in previous research. So, I mean, if you were to look at it that way, you could say, oh, well, corporate social responsibility, which is an outcome of governance. We could treat that as if it's an indicator, right? Or we could use stock prices. I mean, that's an indicator of strong corporate governance, right? So it really, I think, leaves out all the color, which is interesting here, which is why would material weaknesses that relate to IT, right, affect financial reporting, 8K financial reporting? So in terms of your argumentation, you're leaving all that color out of there when you follow that. The second argument that's put forward in the paper is one that's fairly intuitive, and that doesn't mean it's bad at all. That's great. Well-operated IT systems enhance your execution capability, so you can report on a more timely basis. But now in the 8K context, the question becomes, all right, in general, how can I argue with that? But with 8Ks, if you look at the events that they're reporting, if you look down the table of 118,000 events, here in the parentheses I put how many of these different events are, the four biggest categories. So I'm not sure, the explanation isn't clear to the reader. Why would better IT help me report on new agreements I'm entering into, or changes in officers and directors? Why would, how strong my IT is out there in the sprawl of my organization, why is that going to help me report on officer and director changes on a more timely basis? Right? I mean, that's a small number of people. So it would be helpful to give some examples as to why you think that argument holds. So that's the first point. Second point. On a couple of scales, there's a bit of a measurement issue in terms of the way it's presented. The words in the paper, for both of your key independent variables, the internal control material weaknesses and the IT material weaknesses, in some parts they say it's a 1-0 variable, but when you look in the tables, both variables, this slide essentially repeats itself, the median is -1. So if it's a 0-1 variable, another part of the text says it was coded as -1, 0, and the 0 value was reserved for if there was something not reported. Now, if that's the way it was really coded, that forces a linearity in there, in the sense where it forces the no minus not reported coefficient to be the negative and equal absolute value to the 0 to +1, which all that does is it reduces the power of your analysis, right? So it makes it harder to find results. So you might help yourself by getting rid of those non-reported. And the part I didn't understand too is in the table it says that you got rid of situations where they didn't have a material weakness internal reports, reports with material weaknesses. So I don't know how there could be any zeros. So, thank you. Okay, so recommendation would be to drop those not reported observations, report your ends, and report your minimum maximum values in the table. But I think there's results. They might actually be strengthened. Third, last point I want to make is it would be helpful to really think about what's the research objective. And this is the key part of the paper, right? In terms of IT, what's the effect of IT material weaknesses compared to others? Now, intuitively, if you think about it, what you're saying is, does an IT material weakness effect, is it the same or is it not equal to a non-IT material weakness effect? And so usually you'd run the analysis, put them both in and say, is the coefficient the same? If it's the same, they have the same effect. If they don't, they don't. Now, first of all, based on that coding issue, when you have a -1, +1 coding, essentially what you're doing is you're now cutting the coefficient in half, right? So what you have to do is double it to see if it's the same. And if I look at them, it looks like actually the IT material weakness coefficient, after you double it, is identical to the non-IT material weakness coefficient. So it looks like IT material weakness have about the same effect as non-IT material weaknesses. Although that's not formally tested in the analysis, you would have to, there's a separate mathematical test you'd have to run to do that. And it looked like there was no effect from non-IT, or excuse me, for IT material weaknesses or non-complicated events. Okay, so right now we're saying it looks like the effects are about the same, although that's not really tested. It just shows that we've got these two coefficients. But is the question, because nobody really thinks, will IT material weaknesses have no effect? It's not, because you're not looking to say, well, does it have a zero effect? You're looking to say, is it different? But a really important thing to keep in mind in this data set as a practical matter, and I know this because of the research we did in the same area, is that firms that are reporting IT material weaknesses almost always are reporting other ones, right? And I mean, that's implicit when we run a regression anyway. The effects are additive. So what you're saying is, here's the effect of non-IT material weaknesses, and when you have IT material weaknesses, essentially here's the incremental effect of those. So that even if you had a smaller coefficient, the way you really need to interpret that would be to say, actually there's an additional effect over and above what we have, because there really aren't any cases. So the way you're interpreting the numbers, it becomes very important, right, to be rigorous about that. So, but it's not clear from the sample how many you have, that would, if there are some with IT weakness without it. But what this really does is raise an issue, is because you're using dummy variables, what you could be finding here is just an effect of saying, so if some companies have non-IT material weaknesses and other ones have non-IT material weakness, and IT, it's just that these guys have more material weaknesses. And funny, if you have more material weaknesses, right, you're going to have more delay. So if you really want to answer the question, what's the, how do IT material weaknesses compare to non-IT material weaknesses? Are they different? What you should do, or one strategy, would be to have a variable on material weakness count, total number of material weaknesses, and then have a dummy variable for, or even a count of saying how many of these are IT material weaknesses. And then you say, does it make a difference? Because maybe IT material weaknesses are the same as the other weaknesses. So you might end up with different results. So in summary, you got the right topic. I'm making a suggestion for H1, which might enhance your ability to find results, but that's really not the key. The heart of your paper is hypothesis 2 about how IT is different. And right now, you don't really know because of the way the analysis has been done. It might be an issue of just more weaknesses leads to more lags, which doesn't really say anything about IT per se. All right, so by distinguishing, it would help you out a lot, I think. And then the argumentation, but that's something that can be refined pretty easily. So, thanks.